For this tutorial, I'll give you an overview of the Kapture admin settings. First, we'll click on the Kapture icon to bring up the logon screen. We'll log on as the administrator, which is admin. The password by default is blank. You can change this later if you want to, but for the moment we'll go straight in. And we'll just have a quick look at some of the system setup options by clicking on System Setup here. Again, the password is blank. We'll just click on the tick and yes, there we are in. The first icon gives us the users, and we can quite easily see and change what the user permissions are. This is a test user that's been set up with full permissions. The default user is Kapture, and you can see the permissions set up for Kapture. If you change any of these, then you need to make sure you save the changes before you move on to another section. Here we can change the default language, and I'll just put it back to English, and we click on save here and it remembers the default language setting for that user. If we move to the workstation icon up here, this shows the workstation that we have here, which is my own computer, and the two cameras that have been activated for my version of the Kapture software. Moving on to the next icon, this allows us, if we wanted to change the settings for each of the individual cameras. The Keyless Symphony slit lamp camera is installed with the software, and it's probably unnecessary to make any changes to this particular section. If we move on to the imaging icon here, there's a couple of settings you might want to change. The tick box here allows you to control whether or not the undo is possible in the image processing screen, and here if you were to tick the time and date stamp, the top corner of every image has a time and date stamp allocated to it. Down here we can control the default setting for the image saving, and on this particular screen I've set mine to JPEG. If you were capturing high resolution images of perhaps the endothelium, you might want to set it to bitmap, in other words a loss-free image format. I'll put it back to JPEG, and I'll just save this for the moment. The screen up here shows some of the main settings for where the data is and where the image database is. It's best not to change any of these, as it can seriously impair the functioning of the software. Importantly here, you may want to change the ID prefix for the patient. Here every patient will be allocated a number automatically by the system, and the ID prefix will be IA, followed by the start number of the sequence set below. You can change this depending on what you want. If you're in Scandinavia, you may want to change it to modulo 10. If you're working with in an NHS environment, you might want it to be set to NHS number. I'm going back to auto number, and I'm going to save the settings. If we go back up to the top here, we can look at some of the screens that are used for controlling how the system looks and behaves. With this tab you can change some of the labels that are visible on the screens for the application when you're logged on as a user. Here is the screen where you can control some of the vocabulary that you'll see again in the actual user-based part of the system, so you can control what's going to be displayed in many of the drop-down menus. Very simple and easy to add to. Here, if we have multiple workstations and any of the data is locked, we can clear all of the locks for current workstations. Again, for a single user setup or a standalone setup, this is not relevant. Anyway, that's a quick look at some of the admin settings. For an in-depth explanation of them, they're all covered in the user manual, but the important one really is in the camera setup, in the Kapture setup here, where you make a decision on the filing system for the images and here where you may want to make a decision on the numbering system. That'll do for the admin settings. The next tutorial will be on basic user skills in terms of adding a patient, adding an episode, and going to capture some images.